Hey, welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And, man, Ian Cooper is here. We're here at NDC.
It's also the 10th year, and we've pretty much been to all of them.
Yeah, well, except for the first one. You've been to all of them.
I went to the very first one, yeah.
I went to the second one, yeah.
And we've been, been a part of it ever since, right?
Yep.
So.
And it's, we're here in Oslo at the Oslo Spectrum. It's very cool. If you haven't heard our other shows from NDC, they put us in a fishbowl.
Yep.
It's a little box with windows in it, it's a couple of chairs and
center of an arena, sessions going on all around us.
Right. People pushing sausages down our throats and
and ice cream,
serving us,
and all those other things you're not supposed to eat.
Yeah, serving us coffee and everything.
Yeah.
All right, well, enough about that. Let's roll the music for Better Know a Framework.
Awesome. All right, dude, what do you got?
Well, I found some application architecture guidance from Microsoft.
Oh, really?
For various .NET approaches. And so this is microsoft.com/net/learn/architecture.
Oh, that's pretty straight up.
.NET application architecture guidance. So there are 4 different silos that these are in. One is microservices and Docker containers. Another one is web applications with ASP.NET, then deploying to the cloud with Azure, and mobile applications with Xamarin. And so for each of them, there are ebooks and sample apps and patterns that you can download. For the microservices and Docker containers, there's both an architecture ebook and a DevOps ebook.
Nice.
And a sample app and patterns, and it looks good. The quality of the documentation at Microsoft has gone up significantly.
Way up, yeah. And we have friends who've been working on this stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Bill Wagner and Dan Fernandez apparently driving a whole bunch of it as well. So it's just they've started taking docs really seriously.
Yep, and it's good to see.
Awesome.
So that's what I got. Who's talking to us, my brother?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1071. That's right. I'm going back in the archive a little bit. This was December of 2014, back when NDC London was actually in December, not in January.
Yeah.
We were talking to Ian about hexagonal architectures.
Wow.
A ton of great comments on that show. It's a while. I've noticed, Ian, happily to just sort of get you involved in the conversation right off the bat, that every time we talk to you, you're thinking about the next thing. The hexagonal architectures, service discovery, it's not like you do the same thing every time. And I really appreciate that about our conversations.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.
It's very wide-ranging. This comment comes from Rostik Slepetsky, and hopefully I pronounced that correctly. He says, and again, talk about hexagonal architectures. This episode reminded me of Uncle Bob's talk on clean architecture, where he claimed that from looking at directories from within your solution, it should not be obvious that you were creating a .NET application, but that you were just accounted for the web being a delivery mechanism to reach your application. He's actually talking about ASP.NET. What is unclear to me at this point is how to deal with the classes that represent the data model. If you want your data model to be clean of external dependencies, you make them POCO. But you may need to store them in Azure storage, so you need to make them a table entity. Then if you provide a web API to do CRUD on this data, you may need to mark certain properties with the attributes to perform validation. And sometimes you may want to follow different properties to be set during creation and subsequent modifications. I have once inherited a project where there were 3 classes named, let's say, my thing, just like the do stuff,
$,
in different namespaces to denote Web API request entity, response entity, and then Azure table entity. And then there was a base class or 2 for those 3 in separate namespaces.
Yeah.
It would be nice to hear from someone on how they manage the data model classes in projects with such a clean architecture. Absolutely a challenging thing to get right there, Rostik. And that was 2 years ago. We have had a bunch of these conversations about data abstractions and so forth. So hopefully that's been addressed. But I appreciate your thinking that it's just a challenge, when you're pursuing these clean architectures or trying to keep code that's as agnostic as possible, that at some point you have to point to attack.
Right.
Something that actually matters. And the way you call the data via Web API is very different from the way you'd call to it in Azure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things I tend to do. And I don't know whether we've drifted hexagonal architectures a bit from the original intent, but hexagonal architectures have obviously the adapter and the domain. And the port is kind of what talks between adapter and domain. Or so an adapter could be the test, it could be something like that. And we tend to treat that quite often as some kind of facade, right? Essentially.
Right.
And which basically abstracts the domain. But what we've done over time is actually have some code there. We usually use a model of a command and a handler. And in the handler, you talk to the domain, but you also talk to other ports, outbound ports towards the database and that kind of thing. So all that code that's kind of in that boundary that wants to talk to the domain, but also wants to, say, create a session with the database, goes in that handler in the port layer, which enables us to have this kind of, if you like, demilitarized zone between essentially the adapters and the domain where they can kind of talk to each other quite neatly.
And you encapsulating that dependency then? So if you did need to switch data storage, you're really only looking one place?
Right, yeah. So they're still ports, they're outgoing ports, but effectively we let the two ports kind of talk to each other and involve the domain in the whole process. And that really helps quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, it's very fair.
Smart. Yep.
Hey, so Rostic, thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug. It's on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there, we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We clean our architecture with him.
Little squeaky rag.
All right, let's officially bring Ian Cooper onto the show. He's got over 20 years of experience delivering Microsoft platform solutions in government, healthcare, and finance. During that time, he worked for the DTI. What's DTI?
Department of Trade and Industry.
There you go.
Also Reuters, SunGard, Misys, Beasley, and Huddle, delivering everything from bespoke enterprise solutions, shrink-wrapped products, and cloud services to thousands of customers. Ian is a passionate exponent of software craftsmanship and agile architecture. When he's not writing code, he's also the founder of the London.NET user group and speaks at events throughout the UK. And welcome back. Officially.
I've shipped discs in my time.
Yeah,
Goodness
me too,
gracious.
man.
Yeah,
And then realized they were wrong and needed to ship them again?
Yeah, that was when I was a junior dev. That's one of the first moments where you think, are they going to fire me? When you realize they've got to ship 5,000 more discs for some silly error you made. Yeah.
SneakerNet.
Yeah.
Oh, that pain. Got to ship it again.
Yeah. Being able to deliver by the web is definitely a huge advantage.
This is a hallmark of our show, right? That we talk about all the pain that we've had throughout all the years. That most people coming into software in the last 5 years have no idea what it's all about.
Yeah.
We just feel like grumpy old men.
Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah.
And again, I hope I'm encouraging to you that you always are thinking a little forward here. It's why I'm really happy to check in with you once a year. Because I read your piece on Medium about the need for a C# renaissance. And although I'm really thinking of it as a .NET renaissance. And well, can you set the context for us? I mean, I'll include a link to the Medium article, which everyone should read. But the corollary to the Java renaissance, I thought, was wildly important.
Yeah, so back in about 2011, Bob Lee spoke at, I think, OSCon Java, and he called for a Java renaissance. And Bob's context was, he was working at Square at the time, I think he was the CTO, and Java had been losing mind share, is the best way to describe it, to Rails. Everything was being written in Rails.
Yep.
You know, there was that era, right? Twitter was in Rails.
Sure.
And Bob had been working quite happily with Rails, and then people began to realize, I think, that there was some limitations to Rails. Rails had let them get to market very fast, but scaling was kind of hard, right? And we all remember the Twitter fail.
Oh yes.
Yes.
And Java at that point began to make a bit of a comeback. And Bob's point was that it was very timely because about 2011, there were a number of innovations. The world of Java Enterprise Edition that had put everyone off with its Enterprise Java Beans, etc., was being replaced with things like Spring, with people using Java SE, and things like Netty, and these lighter weight libraries.
They were all running on the JVM,
right? Yeah,
but they were different ways to express what you wanted to do. I felt like Java itself had gotten into like the Corba corner.
Yeah.
Where it was just a little too form, a little too many constructs. Like everything is a ceremony.
Yeah.
And .NET's always been dancing with that as well.
Right.
Well, didn't they just get generics like in 2009
Java
or
8,
2010?
Yeah, that's what I can't remember. Java 8 got a whole loads of catch up, didn't it, with what was in C#?
But cool stuff like Clojure and Groovy, like there were neat things that came in that time span where folks sort of look back and say, there's nothing wrong with the JVM. I'm just a little tired of the ceremony around this stuff.
The JVM is a really good runtime and very fast.
I don't disagree,
And we need to .NET Space. We've made a lot of improvements recently in the performance of the runtime, and that needs to kind of continue to compete with that. But there was just this kind of big architecture feel to it, which meant that when people were starting out a new project, there was a lot of ceremony for just getting the first version out to the customer, given that the customer feedback might be this is rubbish, and you want to basically change it dramatically.
And that was something Rails was brilliant at.
Right,
it's like you could literally be typing as the customer was describing what they wanted and throw a scaffold up of something. It's like, like that. And get to that next step.
Also, now there's more choices, right? You don't just simply get C# and start hacking away. I mean, you have choices about which .NET stack you want to develop to, and we're in the middle of expressing an entirely new stack with .NET Core, and so you're right.
Yeah, my discussion a little bit on the Medium post, and today I was here at NDC, was that there's definitely, some people I've spoken to, and that's anecdotal evidence to begin with, at various conferences were saying, I'm finding it harder to find the interesting .NET jobs, right?
Yeah.
And a few people were saying, I've moved on to this or that platform because there's more interesting work.
Right.
And I wanted to say, well, is this just anecdotal from a particular peer group that I have, or is there some genuine truth to this? So I went away and did quite a bit of digging on, in the US you've got Indeed, I think on IT Jobs Watch in the UK, there's obviously the Stack Overflow produces a lot of information about what developers are using.
Yeah, and you can look at the trends and all that stuff.
And overall, the picture would seem to be that since about 2012, we have been losing, particularly on ASP.NET on the back end, some mind share. And while desktop is pretty firmly safe because Windows dominates and .NET dominates, on the server there's obviously considerable competition.
Sure.
And if you look at the numbers, the really big winner in that time frame seems to have been Node.js. Node.js came along.
And JavaScript as a whole, really.
Right, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one is obviously it was very high throughput because of its use of the libvive engine. The other was that actually it's quite straightforward. If I'm just writing as we began to move towards writing more code in the front end, post the Ajax era, the growth of the SPA, it became, you're doing a lot more JavaScript, and it became quite easy then to just hop onto Node and actually essentially just grab the data I needed and pull it down, right?
Yeah.
And so
simple.
Very, very easy. And a lot of people just were doing sites where all they really wanted on the server was just to go and grab the data.
Right.
And so you can see these kind of two graphs that compare with Node climbing and C# falling a bit. But my thing, and I think there are a number of other reasons that are out there we all talk about occasionally. One is, the move away from on-premise installs in small and medium-sized businesses towards software as a service, which has moved a lot of the provision out of companies into infrastructure as a service, colos, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And whereas for a small and medium-sized business, really, I want my guy running the servers to also on my desktops, look after my Exchange, etc. On Windows, it's great for that, right? I'm learning one technology.
Sure.
When you start to move into infrastructure as a service and you're talking about automating particularly at scale, today, Linux still has significant advantages.
Sure.
And, complete credit to the guys in Windows, they are trying to catch up, but obviously they're coming from behind a bit. So lacking Linux support meant that some people, when they're thinking about building something new, look at that and go, well, I'm a bit behind. I don't necessarily have container support in the same way from new ideas like Docker.
Right.
And the open source ecosystem we had was not as good as in other environments.
Sure.
And some of that was we were very lucky, right? We had Microsoft pumping out a lot of good stuff. But there's only so much investment Microsoft's going to give, and the danger is it's not basically producing a wide enough ecosystem.
Right.
And my point is similar to Bob's. I think we're actually on the cusp of a point where we can get a revolution here because .NET Core is going to enable us to run on Linux, which means we can park that concern that .NET doesn't run on Linux. And actually sometimes I don't know there's anything more than we can tick the box, we can run on Linux. Now we may actually deploy to Windows, but this is not a blocker to us actually moving forward with that particular project.
Right.
And Microsoft moving into OSS, I think, is very positive because it's encouraging the community to engage with OSS, to be happier about picking up OSS platforms.
And they really had no choice, Adam. I mean, it works out really well for them, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And essentially it means, we get a richer ecosystem and more contributors. Now, of course, there's always the danger that, while many other communities would give their left arm for having a big player in the industry funding the development of open source projects and paying for developers to work on them full time.
Right, sure.
The danger, of course, is that Microsoft drowns everybody else out.
Right.
But with things like the .NET Foundation, etc., and John Galloway moving there, I know Microsoft is keen to try and ensure that doesn't happen going forward. We know it's happened in the past. I think we need to park the past and kind of like assume the best intent from people like John to try and address those issues going forward.
Agreed.
Well, and I think the important part is stay engaged to make it come true,
right,
too.
yeah.
Because they are listening. I look at how well engaged the ASP.NET team, for example, is, where they're literally putting on YouTube their conversations and working on through the issue list from GitHub that everyone's contributing to. Like, you put in a significant issue related to that product, you're going to see the team talk about it and decide how they're going to deal with it.
And actually, there have been times when, say, the ASP.NET team had talked about doing something, and people are a bit like, well, that conflicts with a lot of existing projects, and they've got strong feedback via that mechanism.
Yeah.
So I think the communication channels are much simpler for them to get very direct feedback on what they're doing before we get problems in the same way we have.
When I get a sense we got a visibility all the way down the line, like I just don't expect the ASP.NET team to ship anything we don't know is coming.
Right, exactly.
There's just no surprise left. Which is, I mean, it's so much for Christmas, But at the same time, I really don't feel like being surprised by my framework anymore.
Yeah,
I got enough to do.
Exactly. No surprises is a good thing. And so the other thing, that, apart from kind of the movement to .NET Core, I think conquering a couple of those difficulties is I think there's another facets are that. I think that you get inflection points or paradigm shifts almost in the industry. So like when we moved to Windows, basically, we changed. Visual Basic came along because we wanted to build GUIs easily.
Sure.
When we moved to the kind of web, we got tooling around making it easy for people to build websites. Right. When we moved to mobile, then that's the next thing that fell. And then there's basically big data. But I think the next one is what we call cloud native. And cloud native is really a collection of technology directions. But it's mainly around this idea that in the future we were building apps to run probably in heavily containerized or even serverless environments in the cloud.
Yeah.
And the big sort of topics people talk about there are microservices, which I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot.
Never heard of them.
Things like API first, which is now I'm serving mobile and SPA applications. Really what I need to think about is I'm building an API on the back end people should talk to. 12-factor apps, which I've done a few talks of. You can look around for the links to those.
To us about
we talked about it last time.
Right, exactly. Which are a way of essentially making sure we run well in containers. And then there's a couple of more platformy ops things. So basically there's what they call agile application infrastructure, which is really, I just say, devs got bored basically in the DevOps environment with all the grunt work and decided to automate the hell out of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And anti-fragility, which is kind of chaos engineering Netflix style.
Right.
And those are seen as the key trends in cloud.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to let go of the term chaos engineering. That kind of makes me happy. That your system stays resilient through any amount of chaos.
This idea essentially that when someone tells you that no, we're going to actually take down your code effectively while it's in the production environment. So you have to write to be prepared for it. It's not an accident that might never happen.
And having tools like Poly, for example, are a great way to protect yourself against those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's kind of part of the point. Poly is a really good lead-in because I think we do have with .NET Core is well built for running in containerized environments. We have this kind of useful model around the CLI are built around it now, and the ability to basically make sure we have all our dependencies and pull them in and do a separate kind of build and publish process to get into the containers. And we do have in .NET Core a lot of the building blocks we need for creating decent microservices. So things like Poly, things like Web API or Nancy. We've got things like Entity Framework or Dapper on the back end or Service at Redis. You've got basically Service Stack as an alternative whole thing. Event buses, we've got Bride, to which I work on, End Service Bus, Mass Trans. We've got a lot of the right kit.
Right.
Most of it's quite, because of our history, I think a little bit, actually fits very well with microservices because the .NET communities tended to build a lot of quite lightweight, not these kind of old, like we're talking about EJB, big beast things, but actually quite lightweight things which suit microservices very well. And so I think, targeting that kind of microservices environment is very positive for .NET because it has great stuff around performance. It does parallelism very well. If you live in a world of, say, Python or Ruby or Node.js, you can do concurrency, right? You can use something like the libov effectively to essentially mean that when you're doing I/O, you yield control back. But you can't do true parallelism. You can't run multiple cores at the same time without doing multiple processes. But .NET has great libraries for doing that, like TPL, as well as having great support for VirSync or Wait for basically the I/O-bound stuff.
Yeah, it's a very mature platform.
Yeah, and it's fast now. I mean, a lot of the work the guys been doing on performance recently has been paid off dividends. We are much faster now in .NET Core than we are, say, by comparison to Node.js.
Yep.
Sure.
And my other point would be that, dynamic languages are great for those early first versions, but after a while what happens is they can become a bit, they're harder to own larger code bases.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, that's where stuff like TypeScript comes into play, right? You're just trying to stabilize JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really good point. Essentially, the emergence of things like TypeScript are saying we need more, right?
Being able to handle that dynamic problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey guys, hold on right there while we take a minute to pay the bills. This episode of .NET Rocks is made possible in part by Windows on the Google Cloud Platform.
You may not know this, but the Google Cloud Platform supports Windows Server 2008, 2012, and 2016.
It also supports SQL Server versions 2012, 2014, and 2016 standard, web, and enterprise editions with high availability.
You can deploy your ASP.NET Windows apps to Compute Engine or your ASP.NET Core apps to App Engine or Container Engine. That's Google's hosted Kubernetes environment.
.NET and .NET Core libraries are there for all 200 plus Google.com and cloud services in NuGet, led by John Skeet of Stack Overflow fame.
But what about Visual Studio integration? Oh, it's there. You can use Visual Studio to manage your GCP resources and deploy your existing apps.
You get stack driver logging, error reporting, and tracing support for .NET and .NET Core.
PowerShell commandlets for GCP, which run on Windows and Linux.
And a great set of partners to bring your Windows and .NET workloads to GCP, including Capgemini, Neudesic, and Magenic.
So go to gcp.netrocks.com and get your free trial today.
And you're listening to .NET Rocks. Ian Cooper is here. We're talking about the .NET renaissance that is taking place right now. And certainly seems that way. I think we're really poised to it with this next version of .NET Core, the shipping version, and .NET Standard 2. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're pretty close. One of the things we're talking about today is this kind of notion of, there's a couple of similar notions, the hype cycle, where essentially, new technology comes out, everyone gets very excited about it, tons of press, hits the top of the hype curve, then you enter the trough of disillusionment when we try and really use it.
Trough of disillusionment.
And I think we've been kind of through, Project JSON, .NET Standard confusion, and this is all normal, right? I mean, I get that it's painful, but at this phase, everyone's goes through this step of everyone going, they try and use it at scale, and large numbers of people rather than the original team who wrote it get involved and say, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? That's perfectly normal. You thrash through this period, and then some things fall off and die there. They never get through, right? Right? But then what should happen if you succeed is you start to then find the main body people basically take you on board. But there's something called crossing the chasm at the same time, which is that this notion that to make that leap into the mainstream, you have to be solving a problem
that people actually have.
Yeah. So why would someone drop the .NET framework they're using today and take .NET Core instead, right? And I think the answer has to be around, well, I can run in multiple environments. It's basically, it's high performance. Actually, it may simplify the landscape a bit by dropping some of the libraries that essentially are unnecessary nowadays because they're historic, right?
Because they really refer to Windows. I mean, one would argue everything that's happened in the past couple of years is about getting Windows out of the center of everything that .NET was about.
Sure.
And in some ways, it's like Microsoft's gone back to being a dev company. The original Microsoft was a dev company first. They built dev tools. Then this operating system thing came along, and it's kind of been dominating for a while until, more or less, somewhere in like 2011, 2012, operating systems just didn't matter anymore.
Right.
It's just taken us a few years to realize operating systems doesn't matter anymore.
Right. This is one of the big things. If you're running on a runtime, you generally want a live support system for your runtime.
Yes.
But you don't really care what that is. And one of the things that happens to you when you start using things like containers, like Docker, right, is you suddenly realize, actually, all I care about is my Docker file, where I say I want to use Microsoft .NET. And most of the time, I don't really know
Yeah.
what operating system that's actually running. I mean,
Or
in
care.
some cases,
Don't care.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't care, yeah.
yeah, right. Because actually, I just wanted to keep my runtime alive.
If my stuff runs, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know that there's a group of people out there who's like, I would use .NET if only it ran on Linux. You know, I don't see that it's true so much as somebody saying, hey, I like your app. I need to run it in my place, but I run Linux. Can you do that? And you're like, yeah, I can do that. And then off you go.
Right, yeah.
You know, I think it's a very different mindset that it's just like, that is no longer a barrier to entry. That's not important anymore. We can
Right.
do that for you.
Because the future is much more people deploying apps, things like Azure Container Service or Amazon's Elastic Container Service,
Exactly.
or even serverless, right? And serverless, you actually just kind of like PaaS on steroids, right? I don't really care effectively what's happening under the hood because the container is created briefly, my code runs,
Yep.
and then destroyed. And so whatever it was down there,
Yeah.
the less I know about it, the better, because I shouldn't interact with it, because any interaction I do is ephemeral anyway. I can't use the file system or anything else. So really, it's only the writer of the runtime that really cares.
And that's a
he's touched
specialty
that.
they should do. The same way that Windows introduced this idea of abstraction from driver. You're going to work against a device context. What actual hardware is the responsibility of the hardware vendor?
Right.
Now we've literally done that to our execution environment, where the responsibility for the operating system is the responsibility of the operating system builder.
Right. And I just care that it's going to manage memory and file system, etc. for me. I don't really want to care about anything more than it just does that, right?
Remember when we were all vaguely uncomfortable that the operating system was going to manage memory for us? You know, the JVM, the CLR. It's like, really? You're going to do garbage collection for me? I don't tell you when to?
I remember Chris Sells was going to implement reference counting in .NET.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Just because.
Just because it bothered him.
When I used to do C++, one of the things that I enjoyed most about the shift to C# was when I realized, how many lines of code in my average C++ kind of method were dealing with stuff.
Right.
And how many were actually solving the business problem.
Yeah.
And that ratio went up dramatically when I moved to C#.
Right, lines of code that have to do with the platform you're talking to rather than the activity you want to do.
Right. So you asked me a question earlier, by the way. I'll just get back to it about, I talked about C# rather than .NET. Why? Really only because, the numbers of people involved are huge. C# basically is, as they say, millions. VB is hundreds of thousands.
Sure.
F# is thousands. And so really, it's the rising tide lifts all boats thing. When we talk about basically trying to get the .NET framework into the point where it's seen as a modern development platform, addressing C# addresses a big audience, right?
Yes.
And in theory, anything you positively do for the runtime benefits those other languages as well. And of course, they have their own unique selling points, which are strengths and weaknesses for them once you are there. But I think, to me, it feels like in the same way that the JVM is a thing where essentially there's an importance to getting the JVM locations upon which you can then choose whatever your poison language is.
Sure.
We need to focus on getting .NET Core onto that point, but initially that's going to be around getting C# developers really en masse to adopt .NET Core, to think about that kind of renaissance, and to really, in my mind as well, to contribute to open source, really. And
it feels to me like this upcoming version, the version 2, which we actually know is the third version, which is kind of a rule for Microsoft, is going to be the lift and shift version.
I think so, yeah. I think it solves a lot of problem for some existing projects that have lacked some APIs and who I think struggling to find the resources to rewrite them under the old, with those APIs missing.
It's always tough to justify a rewrite. And it seems to me most of the folks we've talked to that are using Core, it's a greenfield app. They're doing a new experiment. They're trying the new thing. They need to take advantage of that platform, and that's great. But you've won the market. You've won the opportunity when somebody can take that existing app, switch frameworks, and maybe a few tweaks, and hopefully there's some kind of guidance for what wasn't going to work, and suddenly you're cross-platform.
And suddenly you're running really fast.
And maybe faster.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely feels like it's a watershed moment for getting the adoption right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the other thing, it isn't just also technology in terms of .NET Renaissance. I think it's also about reinvigorating the community, where I think, this is something new and exciting for us. Rather than people being frightened of some of the ideas coming down the pipe and the fact that there are these things like containers and Linux, etc., going on, I think it's great people should feel energized. Hey, there's some new cool stuff we can begin to deal with. My old skills are still there, but I can acquire new ones.
Take them into the new space.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about the culture in just a minute, but first of all, Richard, you know what time it is?
It must be that happy time again.
That's right. It's time for a Renaissance ode to .NET. Oh, happy runtime. Oh, happy, happy runtime. Why wouldst thou pluck any other loot? Java, thou never worked.
Wow. That's
Thank
sonnet.
Renaissance poetry.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's actually time for it. And, and I would note that it wasn't funny at all.
It was kind of profound.
It was very serious.
Yes.
It's actually time to give away a DXperience subscription to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today, and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best without limits or compromise. Learn more and download your free 30-day trial at devexpress.com/superhero. And before I tell you who the winner is, I learned about some new product that DevExpress has today.
Oh, yeah?
It's a web-based responsive grid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it only updates the cells that you want to update. It's built completely from scratch, and it looks really amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner is Nathan Coop.
Congratulations, Nathan. Golf clap for you, sir.
Yes. And Nathan wins the DevExpress DXperience subscription, a big pile of awesome from them, just for being a member of the fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors, and every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of said fan club. But you got to sign up to win. And Ian, I can't remember what you said last year, but let's ask you again. If you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think last time we talked about the Surface stuff.
Yeah.
£5,000 is the amount of that new Apple
iPhone.
the iMac, isn't it? Effectively.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm wondering a little bit whether anyone apart from someone working in graphics can really justify a £5,000 Apple workstation nowadays.
Well, and we were saying 5,000 American dollars,
right,
so that's
right.
4,000 pounds.
Right.
Because you guys have done a good job tanking your pound.
We had done a good job of destroying
very
our
well
economy.
done.
Hey, give us time. We'll be right there with you.
Here, hold my beer.
Hold my beer.
Yes. We shouldn't compete on that score.
No, please don't. Not good for anybody.
Yeah.
We're trying to give Europe a chance, I guess.
I'm kind of surprised at the Apple announcements because also they didn't just say, "Oh, when it's ready, you'll have it next week," kind of thing. It's the most forward-looking Apple statements I've seen in a long time.
Do you think it's because they're worried that potentially some of the Surface announcements are really going to challenge them?
I think so, and it's funny because I've been working on this sort of history stuff and looking back on things and so forth. And tech companies, generally speaking, suck when they lead.
Yeah.
And Apple's, Apple had everything going on for many years, and then they sort of got to be on top, and they're lost.
Yeah.
Just like Microsoft was for years.
Yeah.
The Microsoft today, where they don't feel like they're in the lead, whether they are or not, is relevant. It's like, is the culture chasing, trying to fight for the next thing?
Do you think it's because it becomes very hard for the people who are arguing for change, like looking down the pipe to the next thing, to be heard in a company where the money keeps rolling in?
Sure.
Why would we change
that's
anything?
the innovator's dilemma, right?
Yeah.
The bottom line is this product is winning. Why would you disrupt that product yourself, right? And of course, the silly part is Microsoft's always been their primary competition. Why would I buy your new version when your old version works just fine? I'm very thankful to Apple to start saying we're going to do AR mixed reality stuff, because I think it'll get Microsoft off the dime. They've been waffling on the HoloLens now for several years, thinking, well, we're all by ourselves here. We can take our time, get it exactly right, and never bloody ship.
Yep.
And suddenly it's like, hey, guess who's coming? The company that knows how to do consumer just the way you don't. So you better get off the dime and move.
Yeah.
Interesting, though, isn't it, as well? I mean, the competition is good and it makes things thrive, but we do seem to have this tendency within the industry to end up with some kind of monopolies emerging because people think, well, if we're all using the same thing, that makes life easy.
But I tend to agree, and that making heterogeneity work is harder. Homogeneity is easier.
Yeah, right.
I don't know that it's true, because ultimately it hurts competition. My favorite piece of competition in recent years was the duel of Chrome and IE.
Yep.
Right, the V8 and the Chakra engine going back. I mean, you're talking about where Node came from.
Yeah.
It was that huge advancement in the JavaScript compilers, and it was the duel between them that really made them as good as they are.
That's right. Yeah.
I want more of that. I think we all benefit when that happens.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't involve standards basically divergence to the point where there's effectively makes life difficult to then.
Well, and that was brilliant, was they were working from the same standard. In fact, it was a standard that they agreed upon and then raced each other to a better implementation.
Right, exactly. And both sides, I think, benefit from that kind of fair competition.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is I'd compete on tech. Don't compete with politics.
Right.
Don't compete with dirt.
Well, that's what
Compete on
Microsoft is doing now with .NET Core. I mean, it's pure tech.
Right. Exactly.
Pure tech.
And in some ways, I feel like getting back to the roots of how do you serve developer productivity in a very broad way.
Right, and as you're saying, it is them coming through the innovator's dilemma of saying, hey, well, why would you change a .NET framework? Right?
Yeah, right.
Why would you make people's lives more difficult? Why wouldn't you just leave everything alone?
Yeah.
Sure.
Because they can see down the pipe.
Yeah.
They have to move, or else they risk not being able to ride the kind of cloud native wave.
Well, even you go back, as soon as they were not releasing Office for the iPad, like, you're off path now.
Yeah.
Right? Go where your customers are.
Yeah.
Don't make them buy a different product. Why hurt one product to support another? Like, it's just a bad path.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I honestly think, like, Windows is in a great position now. Now that you're not at the center of the company now that you don't have an innovator's dilemma either, go make a better product.
And then give it away, please. That'd be awesome. Thanks. Okay, thanks, bye.
Right, yeah. Although I heard a story, and it's probably completely untrue, that they had talked about the idea of saying we could open source Windows, but their problem was essentially, but how would you do that? I mean, Windows currently builds on, banks of dedicated machines. That kind of, how would you actually produce a version that realistically someone who wasn't another tech company could actually spin up a version, build it,
and that's also
understand
true
it.
of SQL Server. That's true of Office. Like, any product that's got that long of legs, that's been around that long, has a build process so catastrophically complex and a testing process so catastrophically complex.
They did publish the source to it a couple of times.
Yes.
Not for anybody.
But that was because of the
request.
DOJ consent decree.
Yeah,
They were required to show
And
APIs.
if you asked for it, you could get the Windows source code. I didn't bite that. I just didn't want the liability.
And that to me is source open, not open source.
But think about it. I mean, if you do that and you agree to it, are you opening yourself up for liability now? I mean, if you're...
I think you can't then go and do something like work on the Linux kernel, basically, at that point.
And I would say they were doing it to avoid liability, because the argument was that there were things...
For them, yes. But I mean for you. If you download the Windows source and start messing with it, something happens. Oh, there's a version of Windows out in the wild that does some evil things. Let's find out who has the source.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's an interesting one. I mean, would it be good for them to take on that challenge and solve those problems such that essentially you could genuinely build Windows? Maybe that would push them in a better technical direction, because they'd have to solve.
I would argue it's easier to rewrite. I mean, in the end, if you look at that's what happened to C#.
But if you think about it, the whole reason that people want the Windows source is so that they understand the system better, so that they know what's going on.
And that's what the source open move did. It's like what you're carrying. And the argument back in the day, again, I've been doing the history lately, was things like Real Player, right? Like audio players, the Windows player always worked better than anybody else's. Microsoft's doing some trickery there. Then when they actually show the APIs, like here's how you call into Windows for it. This is what's inside the API. They're like, oh, we've just been calling it wrong.
Right.
Do it differently, right? Like that's the sort of thing that happens when you reveal the underlying code and can show it to you, even if it's not in a compilable form.
Well, the really positive thing that's happened with the whole open sourcing around CLR, which I'm really pleased for Microsoft and the guys who work really hard for basically open sourcing the CLR, was you then got someone like Ben Adams come along and say, I can make this so much faster. I can find all these things that are wrong already and start submitting PRs to improve the performance. And that is a real, if you like,
hugely beneficial
payback
thing.
Then to Microsoft for how
I also think it's a great,
that work.
It's also a great compliment, Miguel Diaz-Casa, the guy who has, for the past 10 plus years built his own version of .NET.
Right.
When they finally going to open source the .NET libraries, he's like, what are you going to look at first? His garbage collection. Because he's like, I could never build a garbage collector as fast and robust as what those guys were doing, and I want to know. I want to see it. And then when he saw it, he says, I've seen it. I don't know how the hell I did it. It's like you talk about the most optimized code that exists within the .NET framework. It's that bloody garbage collector. And that, to me, is really interesting. It's like when you actually see the source and look at these things, you realize, wow, really smart people built this stuff and worked really hard to make it as good as it could be.
Yeah. So to get back to community, we were discussing
cultural problems, right?
Right, exactly. And
you see this as it's still a problem. I mean, .NET among younger developers and people who are new to it are more resistant to it because there's so many people who have such a history, and you almost have to know a lot of this history and know a lot of these things that just people aren't talking about anymore because it's old stuff.
Right. And one of my concerns is a little bit as a community is that we've forgotten to attract new people in at the beginning of the process. And Dylan Beatty, you guys may have talked to on the show. I don't know.
Yes.
Have we done a show with Dylan yet?
I don't know if we have. Actually.
We will, but we haven't yet.
But he and I run a user group in London, and we suddenly woke up one day and said, well, hang on a minute, when was the last time we ran talks for people who are new to the platform? Right? When was the last time we supported you in your efforts if you'd come in to join? Because right now, if you feel like you could walk into .NET and there are a lot of smart people talking about things, but they're not talking about the entry-level stuff that you need help with to get through in your first 2 years. And the analogy I use is all languages are essentially leaky buckets, right? You can't plug the holes. There are people leaving the whole time. And C# is a big bucket, so is Java, right? But unless you're filling it at the top, it will run dry.
Yes. And it is self-reinforcing. Once you have a gap in the feed system for new people coming in, then the new people that do eventually show up are far enough away from the next people that it's that much harder for them. You're going to lose more, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think we're in a bad state right now for that.
We do have some opportunities here, though. So I think there are things we can be positive about. Young people, I say young people, we're all old around the table. I feel terrible now.
All these old men with their gray beards
sitting around and listening around the table.
Well, we've certainly been doing it a long time.
The Unity engine, right? And get via game, this means people are exposed to C#. Microsoft's done a quite good job of actually getting people in education involved in it. My godson came to, from work experience from me at work, and he'd done C# at school, right?
Awesome.
So there's an opportunity. What we just need to do is give them a way in, and for them not to feel A, that we are not interested in helping them, and B, to not feel that there is this establishment of the usual figures.
You'll never be able to get there.
Right.
And I got to say, at a conference like NDC, I am super happy to see our younger generation speakers. And I put Dylan in that boat, too, because he's only been speaking for a little while now. But Heather Downing's here, and 20-somethings.
Right. We have to feel
goodness.
We have to feel they're coming through. Right.
Yeah.
And we have to make it come to it. And, and then there's the diversity issue, right, which we're all painfully aware of.
Sure.
Painfully aware.
Yeah.
And... one of the things I said is that there's actually a bit of an opportunity here for us in a way, in that, most of us as .NET developers are aware that some people probably cast a little bit of, view us with a little bit negatively. They go, .NET
those guys.
There's a famous blog, isn't there, by some startup CTO saying, I'd never hire a .NET developer.
Right.
It's a bad thing on your CV. Right, and I think actually, in the way that you should embrace all these things, I think we should embrace it and say, you know what, actually, the .NET community should be embraced not being an elitist group, right, and actually being broad. And one of the things I really admire about the Python community is their commitment to embracing everyone doing Python, including hobbyists who are working at home, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, as a community, we should say, well, right, that should be a badge of honor for us. We are going to embrace everybody. We are going to pull everyone into our space. We are going to say we welcome all developers,
right?
Regardless if they're just doing it as a hobby, they're writing some stuff in Unity, we should welcome them all, and we should purge any kind of elitism or notion of these are the made men, etc. from our community. Right? Yeah. And people like me should have to fight for our place.
Sure, absolutely. Well, this whole thing of, if you've been building ASP.NET apps for the past 10 years, do you have 10 years experience or 1 year experience repeated 10 times?
All right.
Like, are you actually evolving as a developer as well? Are you putting on new skills, new practices, new approaches? Hey, maybe you're still making the same kind of product, but you are adapting to the better tooling and the better methodologies that are available so that you are evolving. It concerns me that we run into folks that they're doing the same thing they've been doing since 2005.
Because it works for them.
It does, and their employer's happy.
Yeah,
right.
All right.
This, and you hear all the time developers concerned that they treat me like a cog. I just do the same thing every time. It's like, well, it seems like you're treating yourself as a cog too by doing the same things each time.
All right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the quotes I gave in my talk is from an ex-British Prime Minister called Harold Wilson, and he says to paraphrase it, the only place that accepts lack of change is the cemetery. Right?
Nice.
And that is true.
Yeah.
Right. But I think everyone appreciates change is uncomfortable, and no one's suggesting it's not. But I think there's another problem, which is an industry-wide problem, which is there's too much. The industry puts too much pressure on, developers to essentially handle the responsibility of change in their own time, not as part of work. And my partner used to be a lawyer. She bakes cakes for a living now, but she hated the law. But the thing is,
now she puts files in them.
But lawyers expect their employer, and they are required to keep their license to practice. They get a certain number of hours every year learning about changes to the law, learning about changes of what they do.
Absolutely.
And their employers have to basically let them do that in order to continue practice.
Yes.
And I think the danger as an industry is the reason we find quite often people in some of these environments are so resistant to change is, well, when am I going to learn all this stuff, right? I've got 2 kids at home. I don't want to... So I think the industry has to accept that in order to get the best out of its developers, it has to give them the opportunity
to change. This has to be built into the process.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, certainly we're in a place right now where most people that are here, their employer paid for them to be here.
Right.
And maybe you look at it as a bonus. Maybe you look at it as part of your training budget. I don't know how that gets manifest. But I think it's one of our challenges. While we're still not a profession, while we still don't have a regulating board that actually defines us as professional software engineers, we don't have those things. We have to sort of make it come true. I don't know what it's going to take for us to actually be a profession.
But
we need it.
We can do things ourselves, like learn functional programming if that's not part of our daily regimen. That helps us become better .NET programmers.
There's a rule that I actually give to the people at work, and it's kind of a variation of the 80-20 rule, right? And it says, 80% of your skills investment probably should be around what you're doing today, all right? That's what's paying the mortgage, right?
Yeah. And you should get better at it.
Right. And the 20% that should actually be on what you're doing tomorrow. And you can divide that. But spend about 15% of that time on what you think is likely that you're going to need to know tomorrow, right? So if you're a .NET developer, probably you should be thinking about .NET Core, right, tomorrow. Because it's probably you're going to need to know that tomorrow.
Sure,
and that means you're going to extend to the world of understanding things like Docker, right? Probably focusing on Web API, that kind of thing, etc. Things that maybe you're not in your comfort zone right now. Maybe learning a bit about things like what microservices architecture come from, where all those things are. And then 5%, they're saying, should be more of a bet, right?
It's a little more moonshotty.
Yeah, this will pay off big if it happens, but maybe nothing will come from this 5% that I spend. So maybe that's the point where you say, I'm going to go and learn how to program functionally, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think about coming to an event like this, go to 20 sessions.
Yeah.
And 15 of them are going to be related to the stuff you're currently doing, and 3 of them are going to be what you're probably going to do next, and 1 or 2 of them is out there a bit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, I like that model a lot.
Yeah. What are the other challenges to making this renaissance happen besides technology and culture? Are we dependent on Microsoft to continue to do a good job of doing what they're doing? Is there a possibility that they will change gears again?
I think
direction?
I think that any open source direction around .NET really has to include the community building things that are needed as part of the ecosystem, and not just relying on Microsoft. And I think the danger is that Microsoft end up feeling responsible to do all these things if the community doesn't.
Yeah.
If we have an open source ecosystem, it's going to mean we need to basically go out there and build things. And there are. If you talk about this kind of cloud native model, there are already areas where you can see, well, there are products out there, but maybe we need something in our community. So a classic example would be, as soon as you're not running on Windows anymore, you're not necessarily going to be running in a Windows service using something like Top Shelf, like we all use and love Top Shelf. It's made our lives very easy. But Windows services don't exist on my Linux box, right? So if my container's running something like Linux, that's not going to work for me. So maybe I decide to use supervised, right? So basically, which is a nice Python library, helps basically kind of supervise a worker pattern, helps basically keep me up. But maybe I'd want to actually understand the code and what's happening a bit more. And maybe I'd want to actually have one of those written by somebody basically in a .NET language, right?
Okay.
So there are some opportunities there for people to work on projects that form part of our infrastructure. Another one I have on my list of things people should probably tackle is something like a configuration server. So a lot of people today have a build process where essentially the build process templates config files for given environments and hard codes in the strings and values and keys that you need in those environments.
Yeah.
Doesn't scale very well, and you get a very complex build process for something that doesn't really need to be. And you'd be better off with a configuration server of some sort, which keeps the secrets you talk to, and it's very dynamic at runtime, right?
Yeah.
And there are things like, we can do service discovery with useful tools like Console, which is written in Go. There's things like Vault, which contains some secrets, and there's things like, Cloud Foundry has a Java configuration server. But again, it's a space where I think within the OSS community in .NET, it would be useful to have some kind of configuration server written.
Isn't there anything that exists like that already? Seems to me
know.
I saw something. Maybe it wasn't.
There might be,
.NET.
and that'd be really great if someone basically tells us what that is.
Yeah.
And you speak to actually another problem, which is, how do we communicate with people about what tools to use in the open source ecosystem?
Right.
Get that conversation going so
Sure.
people understand. I have this need. Are there projects live and out there? .NET Foundation can help, but we need some way effectively of communicating about the OSS ecosystem, right? And that can be a real challenge for people. I mean, I work on an open source library called Brighter, which helps you do task queues and a kind of CQRS patterns, and it can be used for microservices as well. But one of our challenges is how do I get that information to people outside?
Yeah, all right. So, most people use Stack Overflow as the sort of the technical Google, right? And it's a good way to, looking at Stack Overflow trends is also a good way to tell what people are mostly asking about and being concerned about. But I agree, there needs to be more of those places out there where we can see what people are talking about.
Yeah, and almost just even a somewhere saying, here's a stack, and you can build stuff with this stack. I talked to one of my talks today about the fact that there's a thing called Drop Wizard in Java, which essentially is tooling that lets you help new microservice projects. And it would be, very interesting for someone to build a CLI project that essentially says, you're spinning up a new microservice. Here are your options. You need something to do this, right? You pick from the list of libraries we've got templates for, etc. And you spin up your template, your scaffolding for your bare service.
Right.
But it plugs into templates that are given providers, right? So that essentially we can then make it very easy for somebody to say, I'm going to pick this, and this, put them all together and produce a template that actually works to do that.
I actually have been working on something like that. And it's sort of like a code generator on steroids, if you think of it that way.
Yeah.
That you just say, this is what I want to use for my store, these are my service technologies, pick your stack, and like you say, but have the templates do most of the work, just to get you up and running.
Right.
The other problem with that approach, though, is you end up with a lot of stuff that you didn't write and don't own and maybe don't understand. And, that provides this psychological friction, if you will, to understanding it and using it correctly. I don't know about you, but every time I I get an error in some substrate library while I'm writing code, it's hard for me to remember, oh, that error isn't for me. That's a bug that somebody else has to deal with, because it's in my nature to want to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, and it's always been a tricky one that, who do you go to for support? And obviously, the best OSS libraries are ones that do have active Slack or Gitter channels that help you actually do support.
Yeah.
And that is, when you're choosing an OSS library, understanding whether there's a community around it you'll be able to ask questions of is a valuable part of the process of understanding whether that library is worth using. Of course, it is chicken and egg for the guys writing the library, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to use your library because it's got no community around it.
Right.
But it's never going to get a community around it unless someone starts using it, right?
Right. Yeah. You get into that nasty rut. And I flatly admit to, whenever I look at an open source library, first thing you look at is, when was the last commit? How many contributors are there? Like, it's my gauge of the health of a library.
Right.
All it really takes is one or two people to shepherd a project, though, and continue to work on it to get everybody excited about it. Really, they just want to know that it's being worked on.
Yeah, somebody loves it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
And it's starting with the principal, the dictator for life. If they haven't seen a check-in from that person in a year, that should make you nervous, unless you see clearly there's a set of disciples that have taken it on because that person had to go on about their business one way or the other. Talking about traditional open source projects here.
Right, I think that's very, very true. Yeah, I think you need to feel this engagement. I mean, I think, we have a Gitter channel, right? And I think you can probably tell, the health of the project by if I post in there, does anyone reply, and how long does it take to reply, right?
Yeah, and a lot of Gitter channels I've ever dropped into, it's seconds. Like, what I like is I drop in to gauge health and see a question from someone else come up and get immediately answered, and also get a sense of that culture, right? Because how many times is the answer, go read the docs, Nimno? It's that's been answered, but...
So, Ian, what's on your radar? What's next for you, man?
What are we doing? So for on Brighter, we're going to do some integration with just a Python version, which integrates so that you can send messages between the C# version and the Python version. I think particularly useful.
You mentioned it, but just tell us briefly what Brighter is again.
So Brighter essentially is a library there's two purposes. Essentially, it deals with the command side of CQRS and lets you basically push a command to a handler, but we let you put that handler on the far side of the message queue.
Okay.
So that you can either run in process or you can run asynchronously using the message queue.
All right.
And that's called a task queue approach. And as such, also you can actually use it to communicate between two microservices. We have a sister project called Darker, which has the query side, basically, CQRS. But we're going to do a Python. I'm working on a Python version called Brightside because it's Python, so you have to look on the bright side of life.
Nice. That is great.
I had to get that gag in somewhere. And the idea really there is to let you have a C# API that basically decides it's going to call Python because it wants to do some data science or whatever on the back end and send it a message, or vice versa. You could do it either way around. And so get a little bit of that. In the microservices world, one of the benefits perceived in microservices is that you can write the different services in different languages, and some languages have some nice niche areas where it may make sense to use that language over a more general purpose one, right? So we're looking at that. Overall, I think the thing that's really exciting me, and I've not done enough with really, is looking more at serverless.
Yeah.
That's the one area I really feel that I've not put enough of my time into really seeing what I can do with it. So that's next for me, really.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, man. It's always great to talk to you.
We have fun.
Yeah, we're just talking. And thanks again, Ian, and we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a